Hi, thank you all for coming to our second SoHo Forum debate here at PorcFest. Jason, please sit down. I'm going to call you to the stage. Yeah, he just did, yeah. I like to do dramatic. What I run at the SoHo Forum is a sort of theatrical evening. People are called to the stage. They make dramatic entrances at our one-on-one debates. I started the SoHo Forum in September of 2016 because I really wanted to do one-on-one debates. I really think that 2 versus 2 is usually something that doesn't quite work. People get not enough time to make their statements. In addition, they often are not coordinated. It goes in different directions. Each person in a one-on-one, you're responsible for your own argument. You'll have ample time. I allocate a lot of time for people to make their arguments, almost speech time. People are appalled 17 and a half minutes to make your argument in a debate, and I usually say, well, that's pretty short for a speech. We want nuance at the SoHo Forum, and we also want theater, and we want plenty of dogs to come because they get excited as well by all the theatrical drama that happens at my SoHo Forum. I've been doing it now every month since September 2016. During what I now prefer to, prefer to call, of course, the COVID tyranny. I was forced to do the SoHo Forum on Zoom. I got Zoom fatigue pretty quickly. Yes, it's an enormous hassle to bring people to New York, put them up at a hotel, to book the hall, to sell tickets, to do all of that. But it's theater, it's people getting together. And then my wife, who's in the audience, throws a party afterwards, which is only 2 blocks uptown from where we live. Look, we're still in Sin City, New York. I'm pushing 80. I've been living there since 1967. I'm kind of stuck there. I come up to PorcFest partly out of the way Dennis Pratt constantly makes me feel guilty about not moving up here. But so that's why I'm here to partly do penance. But I want to suggest to all of you to maybe mosey down to New York, go onto our website, thesohoforum.org, and you'll find our debates. I'm going to get to those in a moment, but I want to also encourage you to please take out your cell phones and go into SoHovote.com, 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 SoHovote.com. Did I spell that right? Yeah, you'll see it, and you'll see the resolution. Slightly wordy. All our resolutions are negotiated between the debaters, and sometimes they do get a little awkward and wordy because sometimes the negotiations go on for days. I had a bit of a negotiation with Dennis Pratt, my opponent, but I have email, and I guess when I publish my Debate Society memoirs, you'll be amused at some of the exchanges that go back and forth and back and forth. And one of my big strategies, I'll let you into a trade secret, is that when I reach an impasse and I want these two people to debate each other, and they're stuck on wording, and it looks as though it's not going to happen, I come up with a brilliant solution. Let's switch sides. Let's make you the negative and the other person the affirmative, and often that solution works. Just switch it around, and then they accept the wording. So I have to do that as well. Again, I'm fading out for the rest of the day, but I just want to leave you with a couple of recommendations that on July 15th, we're having Matt Ridley, best-selling author, who's co-written a book on how the COVID originated in the Wuhan lab. I had an impossible time getting a well-established virologist to debate him. They just dumped on him. The anger that I got from these people that anybody would suggest that it came from a Wuhan lab was just amazing, and they were just amazingly defensive about it. Yet I finally, one of my secrets is that I managed to get enough money to give these people a good payday. This person, I offered this person the initial fee of $2,000 plus expenses to come. This person said, no, I'm not interested. Professor of the University of Arizona. I said, how about for $12,000? And you'd think that's kind of dumb. Why don't I sort of slowly, why don't I say 5,000, 7,000, 9,000? Maybe you don't know what progressives are like, but I do. Because if you start turning them into meat that you're bidding on, and you keep going up by 2,000, they get offended. So I just zapped him with a $12,000 offer, and he said yes. So July 15th is that debate with Matt Ridley, who co-wrote a book on the SARS-CoV origins, and then in August and September we're doing the elections. In August, I'm getting Art Laffer, famous for the Laffer curve, to argue that libertarians should vote for Trump, and in September I'm getting David Stockman, also pretty well known to libertarians, to argue that libertarians should vote for RFK Jr. What I initially had decided in advance was that the opposing side would be who's ever going to be president and vice president of the Libertarian Party, and of course I ended up with Chase Oliver, who's going to be the president. Who's going to argue in August against Trump, and then Mike Chamath, who's been up here, who is up here this week, debating David Stockman about RFK Jr. And so all of that should be pretty eventful, and all of these people come to the after party, and you can chat with them afterwards. So it's a social evening as well, and a way to learn a lot. So look on our website and see if you can arrange a little trip to Sin City. We do charge $20 for adults and $10 for students. We reduced our prices because we came into some money, but it's cheaper than a movie in New York, and it's a great theatrical evening. And of course, the Oxford-style voting, the Tootsie Roll, just adds a little drama to the evening. As I keep saying, basically, what did you come away? We are all libertarians. We're not Democrats, but it does add a little spice to the evening. Who swayed the crowd the most? And so I'm in bed with it. I like doing it, even though I've come under criticism for it. I just say that, look, drum roll, please, who won? Toss the Tootsie Roll at the winner. That sort of ends the evening on a dramatic note. But again, we are libertarians. What did you come away with? What did you learn? How do you feel? In what way did your views change? Or in what way did you at least understand a little better the position of the opposing side? I'll finally shut up and point out to you that I've done 11 SoHo Forum debates. Yesterday was my losing debate against David Friedman. I took the affirmative for the first time, and prior to that I've done 10 others, and I took the negative in every other case. Today I'm comfortable once again doing the negative against the guy I like to call the great philosopher of the Free State, Dennis Pratt. But he's got to recuse himself from moderating. I've got to recuse myself from moderating. And so we have a moderator who volunteered. He's going to be paid nothing for this service. You're going to take on these two lunatics. Jason Sorens, it's yours for the rest of the afternoon. Please bring Jason to the stage.
Thank you very much, Gene, and this is my second time participating in a SoHo Forum debate. The first time as moderator, so I am a rookie, and even though the SoHo Forum format has indeed spread to New Hampshire, and we are doing some of our own debates, thanks mostly to the efforts of Dennis Pratt. Slight heterodoxies, perhaps, in the format and practice of these debates have emerged, and therefore I may rely on you for some guidance if I do anything wrong here in terms of the sequence of things. But Yes, SoHoVote.com, and I hope I'm allowed to vote because I did. Yeah, okay, great. So SoHoVote.com is where you want to go, and actually my sheet with the resolutions right here. Let me look at the website just to make sure we have the most up-to-date version of the resolution. A better way to persuade more people of libertarianism is to convince them of the ethics stemming from self-ownership and the non-aggression principle without relying primarily on consequentialist/utilitarian arguments. Okay? So we've got a fight here between self-ownership and non-aggression and utilitarian consequentialist arguments. And so I'm very much looking forward to this, in part because I recently read an article, a new article from a philosophy journal that said, we should treat people according to the ethics that they themselves believe in. So if you're a utilitarian, we can sacrifice you for the benefit of humanity. If you're a socialist, we can expropriate your wealth, and if you believe in self-ownership, well, we can't do anything to you. So I kind of like that, that philosophy. So I want to introduce our debaters today, and they probably need no introduction in this crowd. Nevertheless, I will do so. So for the affirmative in favor of self-ownership, we've got Dennis Pratt. So Dennis has been a libertarian for more than 43 years. He was the #1 writer on libertarian topics at the competitive intellectual essay site Quora, writing 1,800 essays over 4 years, primarily on ethics before being deplatformed. Boo. Statists. He moved to the Free State 6 years ago to become the consummate volunteer, building our libertarian homeland, starting the famous Shell Libertarian Clubhouse, opening and running the Free State Independence Inn. Should definitely go. There's food. Leading Liberty bus tours, raising hell with the nefarious LPNH, leading medicine to ease dying bills, medical aid and dying bills, and tweeting about libertarian ethics and the Free State. You can follow him on Twitter at Dennis Pratt Free. And according to this, there's only one T in Dennis Pratt Free. Is that? No, that's not correct. That is not correct, in fact. It is Dennis Pratt Free on Twitter. So welcome to the stage, Dennis. And that leaves for the negative, Gene Epstein. The one, the only Gene Epstein will take the negative. And Gene stepped down from a 25-year stint as economics and books editor at Barron's Financial Weekly, where he wrote a widely followed weekly column called Economic Beat. Since then, Gene has been actively directing his debate society, the SoHo Forum, which you can find at thesohoforum.org. Gene maintains an active Twitter account at Gene Soho Forum, writing articles and doing frequent interviews on many libertarian podcasts. So welcome, Gene. All right, has everybody voted? All votes have been cast. Right? All right, so once again, SoHoVote.com. The last few seconds to get that in, because we want you to be untainted by these arguments when you cast your initial vote. And I see someone on a phone, so I'm going to pause for just a second before we begin the arguments. Here's the way this is going to work. We're going to have 17.5 minutes for the affirmative, and then the negative, and then 7.5 minutes each to respond to each other. Then we're going to have a period of question and answer. The debaters can ask each other questions. We're going to get some questions from you, our audience, and then we will have 5 minutes each to wrap up, and then we'll vote again on the resolution and really give your sincere opinion of the topic. All right, so again, for one last time, here is the topic. A better way to persuade more people of libertarianism is to convince them of the ethics stemming from self-ownership and the non-aggression principle without relying primarily on consequentialist/utilitarian arguments. For the affirmative, Dennis Pratt, your microphone.
So I started my libertarian journey in 1981, 1982, primarily through ethics. But very quickly, I left the area of that there is some sort of universal rule that guides the minimum of how we have to treat one another. Right? That's the ethical argument. And I very quickly switched over into the consequential realm because I didn't know about the consequential argument, and all of a sudden I was inundated with Reason magazine and Cato and all the books, and they're all by these great economists like Gene Epstein. And of course, the consequentialist argument is that it produces the best results for the most people towards certain goals over a particular time period. And therefore, rulers should allow us poor subjects to be free a little bit more rather than enslaved as much to their stupid rules. So we have the two things, and I basically went in and started studying. What are these consequential arguments? I had to go back to school because I was coming from the left, right? So I had to go back to school and take a couple of years of graduate school in economics to go, okay, what are the good consequentialist arguments? I really got them. And boy, they were so good. The arguments, consequential arguments against war, and the consequential arguments against welfare and poverty, and the consequential arguments against trade barriers, licensing, and minimum wage. But it was just endless studying. And it just took me so long to learn this stuff. And then I would start arguing. I would go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And you know what I was missing? Was the beauty of how we treat one another as human beings, which is what had attracted me to libertarianism in the first place. That we actually regard each other human as someone sovereign, as worthwhile in and of themselves. Not worthwhile towards some goal, worthwhile in and of themselves. And the other thing is, it just didn't work. It wasn't until I slipped back into ethics, probably about 30 years into my journey, that all of a sudden I started getting a lot of success. So, and like I said, Jason said, I wrote almost 1,800 articles, or probably over 1,800, on libertarianism from an ethical perspective. So the problem with consequentialism, using consequentialism primarily, is that it doesn't persuade one of libertarianism. It's too hard to learn the consequential arguments for the infinite number of policy areas. It's too hard for the target, the person you're trying to convert, to absorb all of these very erudite arguments. It's too long a conversion process using consequentialism. And it's just too darn easy to refute. So the first part, it doesn't persuade you of libertarianism. Well, how do you know that you're persuaded by libertarianism? Well, you have a rule that you can use any time. You don't need to take a gigantically long class. You don't need to call Dennis Pratt and say, hey, what's the argument for this? But you can extrapolate it to almost any policy area. It gives, without fail, the correct libertarian solution. And even though your target might have a crony interest in the authoritarian solution, they have to say, yeah, okay, you got me. And I will go ahead and abide it. Now, at that point, I would say you're pretty safely in the libertarian camp. Can consequentialism actually do this? Okay, so, it's really hard to convince someone of libertarianism of even one area consequentially. I've had arguments with people that have gone over for years. But let's say I do that incredible thing, and I actually convince them in one policy area Do I have a libertarian? Okay, well, obviously, we just haven't done enough consequentialism. So let me get out the books. We're going to go into the second area. A couple of years later, I now have them on 2 areas. Do I have a libertarian? Exactly. All that work, and I don't really have a libertarian. As a matter of fact, you can see if I go to 100 policy areas, I still don't have a libertarian because it's the 101st. And it's not just 101 policy areas, it's an infinite number of policy areas that these bastards are trying to get us. So logically, I can't prove libertarianism consequentially. So you can't use it primarily. The second thing, it's just too hard to learn an infinite number of policy areas. Let me suggest 2 forms of human. There's us mere mortals, and then there's the great Gene Epstein. Now, with a brain as big as Gene Epstein, right? You can remember all the facts and figures and graphs, and, even though he gets really upset if he doesn't have his PowerPoint. And you know all the counter studies and the refutations of the counter studies. And of course, you know the first order and the second order and third order, and God, fifth order effect. You know what the fifth order effect is here? How many of us can become an expert at that level in just one policy area? But even if you became an expert at that, what are you doing? You're going to sit around waiting around? Ooh, where's this person's going to come by that I can tell him one policy area and he's going to become a libertarian? Yeah, that just doesn't happen, right? They're going to show up and they might be interested in any particular policy area. And so, one policy area isn't good enough for you. So you have to go and you have to take the seminars and the books and go to graduate school. And how many people here are autodidactic, right? You have to study, and we're all really good at that. And we read all the books. If you read these books, you'll become libertarian. Well, how many people are going to read that? So mere mortals like you and me, we don't have any hope to attain Gene's intellectual ability. We have a limited lifespan, we have limited intelligence, and frankly, we have limited amount of cash that we can transfer to his economics classes. The third, it's too hard for the target to absorb. Okay, so Gene not only thinks that everyone has his intellectual ability, but they also think they think like economists. Well, how many people here went to college? Raise your hand. How many people studied economics in college? Okay, so fewer. Most people go to college and don't study economics. And then when they do study economics, they're studying Keynesian economics, which teaches you the opposite of thinking. And a lot of those people are getting C's. Do you think Gene ever got a C in his life? So he doesn't quite understand what it's like to be, as Jethro tells us, thick as a brick. Thick as a brick is because that's the rest of us. Most people are high school graduates, and the only economics we can hope there is home economics. So the typical target doesn't have the time and capacity to absorb these arguments across all these different policy areas, but they want to do more than just absorb it. They want to convey it. Because if they actually go back to their wife and they go, well, I'm thinking, geez, we really should be against minimum wage. And then their wife goes, what are you talking about? Well, let me repeat to you the Gene Epstein arguments against minimum wage. They can't do that. They can barely understand it, let alone convey it. And so a lot of them will just give up. It's too long a conversion process using consequentialism. So the resolution today is about how we can do more people. Well, there's this thing about sales that if you have a lot of people coming at you, very few of them are going to be interested in your product. You have to do something called qualify them. If you want to maximize your sales input, you have to qualify them. Well, how do you qualify somebody for libertarianism as a consequentialist? You know, you could ask them, what do you think about minimum wage? Do you think minimum wage should be this or that? Well, they're going to tell you the authoritarian answer. Well, then you could go through the 6-month, 8-month, 2-year argument, and then finally they go, but you still haven't really qualified them. Ethics has a very simple qualification. Do you believe that you own your own body fully and exclusively? That you have no superior ownership over your body, including rulers? Now, I can do that, and I ask a number of other questions, but that basically qualifies somebody for whether they're available to the ethical argument. Because the psychopaths go, oh, I don't know. Okay, so I just move on. So in order to actually do a lot of people, you have to have a good qualification, because we are very few. The types of people who can become libertarian are very few. And we have to find those needles in a haystack extremely quickly. I think we are on the last one, which is consequentialism is just too easy to refute. So when we enter the consequential realm, I call it the battle of the crystal balls. For we're all going to gaze into our crystal balls and tell you the future will be like this in freedom, or the future will be like this with our leaders telling us how we should live, right? And you might be surprised to find out that your crystal ball doesn't really match up with their crystal ball. Now, of course, you can point to studies. Well, we know this from this study, but studies disagree. There's experimental design errors that they can point out. Well, your study has this error or that error. It didn't actually measure this segment, or it's measuring on the wrong result. And of course, the thing that we use all the time in consequential arguments is, that might be true of the first order effect. When you actually put a policy, this affects that one group. But what you're ignoring is the second order effect. Because of that effect, there's these other things that happen. And frankly, it just comes down to as simple a refutation as, I don't believe your crystal ball. Now, I had one woman who I spent a long time on minimum wage. Minimum wage was the thing that actually got me against consequentialism. And I spent a long time with her, and she finally agreed. She says, yes, I understand. Your arguments are so good, and I can't actually argue against them. I agree with them, but I just want to do the right thing. I think people should be paid more. Well, what was she doing? She was trumping my consequential arguments with ethics. And the reason why ethics wins is because most people want to be thought of as good. Libertarianism is not an economic discipline. It's not a consequential discipline. It is an ethical movement. We are here to correct common man's indoctrinated misunderstanding of ethics. How to treat one another with a minimum level of respect. Because even if you gave me consequential arguments that it didn't produce the best health care, the best education, the most wealth, which I think they actually do, I would still be a libertarian because I am not into evil. Libertarians, we don't have to really worry about imagined outcomes. This is really more about how we treat each other along that path to an infinite possibility future. We don't have to argue about what that thing is. Am I treating you with the minimum respect I owe you? Now, consequentialism is useful. I'm not saying don't use consequentialism. We all use consequentialism. But don't use it as an argument for libertarianism. I mean, if you think about it, that's one of the reasons why we have so many thick libertarians. Libertarians who say, oh yeah, well, I agree with libertarianism, but I think we need government here, government there. Because they have good consequential arguments for why government is needed there. And the other side has good consequential arguments there. Now, I think over time, that narrows. But I think early on, we produce a lot of very thick. Consequentialism is used by authoritarians to justify their violence all the time because they face the same problem we do. You gotta break eggs to make an omelet is what they'll say. But now, if we had an excellent consequential argument for murdering Gene Epstein, would we do it? All right, I see you guys. No, okay. But would we say it was libertarian to do it? Right? Even if it was really, really good. Ethics is the sword for the libertarian Gordian knot. It conveys and justifies libertarianism. It's easy to learn. It's easy to utilize across an infinite number of potential policy areas. It doesn't require an infinite amount of time to learn each area. It's easy to target and convey to others, and it's easy for your target to explain it to their friends. You can qualify people extremely quickly, and it's persuasive. It matches what we knew as children. What we had to go and get indoctrinated for 12, 16 years to forget. It aligns with our gut feel for how we ought to be treating one another. Don't hit others and don't take their stuff.
Thanks. The reason you should vote against the resolution defended by my brilliant friend Dennis Pratt turns on one key word, the word more. I remind you that the resolution reads, a better way to persuade more people of libertarianism is to convince them of the ethics stemming from self-ownership and the non-aggression principle without relying primarily on consequentialist utilitarian arguments. I agree with Dennis that both self-ownership and the non-aggression principle is what we might call the superior way to convince anyone of libertarianism. Dennis's wife, Carol, asked me, what are you doing arguing with Dennis this year when last year you were arguing with David Friedman that the zero aggression principle, as I prefer to put it, or the non-aggression principle is primary. That is indeed what I argued with David, and I profoundly believe that. But when Dennis uses the word more people, he's making a statement about the consequences of making an argument. He's telling us that he knows that we can persuade more people to his approach, although the one thing I noticed that he did say was that we can convert very few people to libertarianism through his approach. So I only ask you to take the skeptical view of Dennis's consequentialist argument, as noble as it is, and say, first of all, that if we had 10,000 facsimiles of Dennis Pratt, and I gather that's the wave of the future anyway, we'll be able to copy him, then I'm convinced that Dennis will be right. We can convince more people. But unfortunately, there is only one Dennis Pratt, and that's unfortunate. But when we now deal with this question of more people, you have to take the skeptical view and say, since we don't really know, if you voted yes on the resolution, you really should vote you don't know. If you voted you don't know, or even if you voted yes, you should vote no. Because if you're skeptical, then you could say, how the heck does Dennis really know? Well, I think he said he knew because he claims that most of us work in sort of compartmentalized ways. That if you convince somebody of the consequences of policy A, then what about B, C, D, and E? But really, many of us don't work that way. And since Dennis and I are, at least according to Dennis's own definition, own terms, working in a bit of a sandbox, that our hope is to convince more people, and more people simply means better than fewer people, because Dennis conceded that the simple appreciation of the zero aggression principle is something that only few people can be persuaded of. We therefore have a bit of an issue that we have to face. We have to recognize, first of all, that there are many people who go through a certain experience. A couple of things happen that they learn about. I'll mention one. Nina Teicholz, for example, has written about nutrition and the carb diet. And she said over and over again, something simple happened to her. She found out that the reason why the population is so obese is because of the direct and just appallingly irresponsible and dishonest policies of government, originally in the person of George McGovern, who had a great reputation. And then it just shocked her. Maybe she's too rational, but maybe she's just like the rest of us. She said, if I could just randomly choose this issue and do a deep dive into it, and I find that the behavior of government is so appalling, is that just chance? And then if she looks at a couple of other issues, she sees a similar problem. And I could be autobiographical as well. You know, David Friedman, I'm going to quote him, even though, of course, I disagree with him about his indifference to the zero aggression principle. As David states, and I certainly agree, that everything a left-winger wants can be best realized through capitalism. And now Dennis is convinced that you have to convince them of all 19 issues. But again, many of us, certainly a few of us, actually more than a few, don't always work that way. If we see 4 or 5 issues, and it just turns out that in every case, government is fundamentally part of the problem, not part of the solution, then you start tipping over into libertarianism because, again, people aren't quite as logical as Dennis seems to think. Now, of course, I do want to, of course, pounce on him as a consequentialist economist. The woman who said, well, yeah, you're right about minimum wage. I just think people should be paid more. I guess Dennis is going to tell me that he did think to say to this person that if the minimum wage is $6 an hour, then the alternative that these people face is to be paid zero. You know, so they're not going to be paid more. They'll be paid nothing, or they will be paid less because the employer is going to cut back on amenities, because the employer is going to start putting machines in. So you want people to be paid more? Well, I assume you don't want them to be paid zero. You don't want to see a situation in which the teenage black unemployment rate was about the same as the white unemployment rate around 1950, but then they started to raise the minimum wage and the racists came in. Let me tell another story. I appeared on the podcast Run Your Mouth, hosted by Robbie the Fire Bernstein. Yeah, and I revere Rob. I began by telling him that it was an honor to be interviewed by one of my 3 favorite Jewish podcasters, the other 2 being Dave Smith and Glenn Greenwald. But at one point in the conversation, Rob corrected me on an assumption I made about the roots of his libertarianism. He said to me, what motivates me for the ideas of liberty is that they work better, more than that they are morally justified. what grabbed me to this philosophy is that it works better. If someone would have put forward a centralized government authority that worked better, I wouldn't say it's morally wrong. It's just that, to me, it doesn't work. So one of my three favorite Jewish podcasters, a libertarian for sure, told me that a centralized government might be worth supporting if it actually worked better. For him, freedom isn't the issue at all. Consequentialism is. Again, and it's not, and I can tell you for sure, because I know Rob quite well, it's not as though he's an expert on every issue involving libertarianism. It's just that he sees enough of the consequences of what government does to know that that should really be enough. Now, admittedly, I want to hedge a little bit and say that if Dennis is defining libertarians as strict anarcho-capitalists, then I guess perhaps that's a bit of an extreme to expect. But if he'll accept at least that a libertarian is someone who wants to dramatically roll back government influence over the economy, at least, let's say, to a threshold of 50%, 70%, then I would say that person is pretty much of a libertarian. We don't have to be purists. We do know that all around us, the appalling influence of government that sort of takes you by the throat. Takes you by the throat, not in the rational way that Dennis was implying, but in a kind of an irrational way. I myself came to libertarianism in part through the Vietnam War, reading Noam Chomsky and recognizing that the intellectuals are essentially trying to run the world, that you are not. I should back up and say that I was a left-winger then. My mother was a member of the Communist Party, and I thought I was a fantastic rebel. My father was an FDR liberal, so I came into this world with all the disadvantages. If I could rise from that level of intellectual depravity to become the libertarian that I am, then that must mean something. My evolution really was that I thought it would be great if the intellectuals ran the world, and then Chomsky pointed out, even though Chomsky is still a socialist, and I wouldn't call him a libertarian, he convinced me that it's worse. He actually said that I'd rather have Averell Harriman run the world, because Harriman thinks he has a right to run the world because his grandfather owned railroads, and the intellectuals think they have a right to run the world because they're smart. I choose Averell Harriman, he said, over the intellectuals, because if they're wrong, they get defensive. But if Averell Harriman is wrong, his grandfather still owned railroads, so he's going to be more flexible. So that sort of moved me in one direction, and then I read Murray Rothbard. But I read economics by Murray Rothbard, and that's when I began to realize, and then Mises, and that's when I began to realize that capitalism is essential to lifting the living standards of the broad masses of people. And I hang out in New York City. I used to live on the Upper West Side, so you can imagine the kind of people I know. When I'm asked, why are you a libertarian, 900 of the poor of this world. I care hundreds of the poor of 6 million YouTube views. It keeps climbing. I attribute it to his celebrity rather than mine. My other two had 100,000. But what does this broad segment of people care about? I know those people. I was raised with them, and so maybe I can convince a few of them. They care about worker ownership, and they care about poverty. And I can make the simple point that you keep mentioning Mondragon in Spain, the worker ownership success story that I've been hearing about since 1980. It was started in a capitalist country far poorer than ours. So isn't that proof self-evident proof, as I pointed out to Rick Wolf, with 6.6 million people looking at it, that worker ownership can happen in a capitalist economy. It's just private ownership of the means of production. The workers can own the means of production. They have the wherewithal. I know the numbers. They have the power of the purse, the consumer purse. And then look at what's happened to poverty. So I'm talking about that broad group of people. FDR liberals, the big resurgence in leftism. Take a course of mine? No. Just listen to that debate. It's theatrical. So maybe I've convinced as many people as Dennis has. Maybe I've convinced somewhat more people than Dennis has. Because once you cross that line and you see, well, worker ownership is possible under capitalism. Poverty is essentially beaten only under capitalism. Cross that line, and then perhaps you are ready for libertarianism. I just said perhaps, because my position against Dennis is that he claims to know how to convince more people, and I claim I don't know. The only thing I guess that I do know is that he should stick to what he does best. I should stick to what I do best, and you should vote undecided or no on the resolution, because there's no way to predict who is going to be more successful. If I have, am I out of time? What do I got? What? I feel, yes, okay, fine. Yeah, and I mean, just as a side point, certainly, I mean, look, the history is on our side, because what government does is so perverse. I mentioned the financial crisis that's coming. What's also happening, by the way, is that the green energy movement is suffering a huge rebellion, but from farmers, from poor people. The absurdities of it. It's essentially about totalitarianism. It's simply about the planned and managed economy. And about it's effectively a war on the poor, and the poor people of Europe especially are beginning to rebel against it. And in the Netherlands declared that they're backing away. India and China will occasionally devote lip service to it, but of course China is building coal plants. India is buying oil from Russia. The Russians aren't going along with it. That particular joke, grim joke, war on the poor being waged by government is becoming more and more obvious to many people. And many of those people, contrary to Dennis's view, don't work in that logical way. They don't necessarily compartmentalize. If they begin to understand the awful poverty that the governments of the world are proposing to impose on people through the green energy movement, then maybe they will begin to think that that's not the only example. If government is capable of that level of stupidity as to think that we can run our advanced industrial economy on wind and sun, if they're that dumb, then maybe there's hope for libertarianism. One final point. A lot of people, what helped me become a libertarian was I worked for government for 7 months. I know a kid, he didn't even have to work for government for 7 months. He just enrolled in a program in government service, and inside of a year, once he began to see the public choice theory, the understanding that these people, these supposed civil servants, are just basically self-centeredly out for themselves, looking to expand their power, that alone zapped him into becoming a libertarian. So we don't know how it will happen. We only know that we can try on all fronts, including the one that I specialize in. Sorry for taking 10 seconds too much. Bye-bye.
All right, so at this point, okay, well, there we go. At this point, we are going to have 30 minutes for Q&A, so let's start the timer on that. And I'm going to exercise moderatorial privilege to ask a question of each debater. All right, so first for you, Dennis, when we look at libertarians who still seemingly believe in the non-aggression principle, but who deviate from libertarian orthodoxy on an issue, it often seems to be motivated by consequentialism. And I'll just give maybe two examples very briefly, and I'd like to get your reaction to it. So there's a guy out there, a libertarian academic, actually a friend of mine, even though we disagree about many things, who famously wrote a paper during the pandemic about how it's perfectly consistent with libertarianism to have government vaccine mandates. And he had a kind of convoluted reasoning how this was consistent with libertarian principles. More on the right side, we've got people who want to tighten immigration laws, and they have some convoluted justification for how that fits with the non-aggression principle. In both cases, though, the logic really seems to be consequentialist, right? They think that we need government to intervene here because otherwise the outcome's going to be really bad. Does that challenge your position there? Like when we think about people going the other way, people not necessarily leaving libertarianism, but at least abandoning the libertarian position on an issue, it often seems to be motivated by consequentialism.
No, actually, I think that supports my position because consequentialism, there's an infinite number of results that you can look at, an infinite number of futures, an infinite number of types of people, and thus you can construct rationales. You can construct justifications for violating other humans' self-ownership from a consequentialist perspective. That is the danger of consequentialism. The output of consequentialism isn't libertarianism. Just because you have consequentialist arguments that align with libertarianism, that's not libertarianism. I think that's a good example of the importance of ethics versus consequentialism.
May I ask a very quick follow-up, or is that not allowed?
Oftentimes, by the way, we comment on each other's answers.
Okay, go for it.
I want to comment.
Yeah.
It's odd that I think Dennis is in a way maybe unfairly handicapping himself. I think that if somebody comes at you with a very strong argument for government intervention, in that case, vaccine mandates, for example, then indeed I do then find it. I can't necessarily convince them of the vaccine mandate issue. So, in other words, when I mention poverty, when I mention worker ownership, then that's something that they care about. So there's no issue with respect to the consequences. They want poor people to get richer. That's good. That's what they want. So we can go with that. But with respect to vaccine mandates, then I think that really Dennis's answer should be to say that, as with all things, the burden of proof is on the coercer. In other words, the zero aggression principle doesn't necessarily say that you don't do violence to anyone. Of course, sometimes you do in self-defense. Sometimes there's a restraining order. Like the example I choose when one of my friends who's skeptical, I say, look, if a guy is threatening his ex-girlfriend with violence, is it okay for a court in an anarchist society, for example, to have a restraining order and say that you are going to be punished if you go within a half mile of that house? I think there's a certain justice in that, having to do with the zero aggression principle. Similarly, you're making an argument that let's say in our co-op, let's not even make it the government. We have a cooperative apartment with 90 units and everybody's got to get vaccinated. Then you can do that in a libertarian society. You can pass a rule. It's your private property. But I would counter it by saying, look, the burden of proof is on you to tell that tenant that tenant's body has got to be invaded by a foreign substance. So this is not a level playing field, this argument that you're making. And that's where I believe you can refute arguments about vaccines. We could get into that. Now, the other part is when Dennis said it has nothing to do with government, indeed, I guess I have to say that not infrequently when I'm asked, what's your elevator summary of libertarianism? I say, well, approximately, it's the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, even though I know, and of course, the Constitution modified for slavery. I know, but that's, of course, obviously, it was Rothbard's basic question, do you hate the state? That was the libertarian question. So obviously, the state is what gets in the way of us libertarians. So therefore, I have to differ with Dennis's implication that the state is not the issue. No, do you hate the state? That's the question. Yeah.
Okay. In the interest of getting the audience, and I'm going to forego the quick follow-up to Dennis, but I will ask you a question, Gene. Yeah. So I want to know if you fully follow through your position in everyday life. If you're debating these issues, do you truly not point out the gun in the room? Because I find that
the what in the room?
Pointing out the gun in the room. Have you heard about this?
The gun in the room.
Yeah. So like well, I favor seatbelt laws. Well, you realize that they're enforced by threat of violence. I mean, would you yourself go attack your neighbor with a gun for not wearing a seatbelt? Well, what makes it okay if you have a badge on, right? That kind of argument, I think, ends up, it shocks people at first, but a lot of libertarians use it. It seems fairly effective, but maybe if you're not even familiar with it, you in fact don't use it. But I am curious, do you think that pointing out the gun in the room, pointing out well, you wouldn't do this to your neighbor, so why would you believe that the government should do it? That kind of argument seems like a non-aggression principle type of argument. Would you not agree that that's
okay.
useful?
Okay, again, you're giving me the opportunity to clarify my position. I'm talking about the more people part of it that is in the resolution. I'm not talking about what is the superior way to argue about libertarianism. I'm only saying that if we're just counting up people and asking and looking around us, do we really know what is the best way to convince more people? In the example that you cited, obviously, if we're talking about seat belts and we're talking about forcing people to protect themselves, you might, of course, bring in the argument that was made by the economist Nelson Peltz, who pointed out that people were driving more dangerously when seatbelts. There was actually more accidents resulting when people were wearing seatbelts. You could bring in that consequentialist point, but of course, I'm far from implying that I don't use zero aggression principle arguments. I'm only talking narrowly about the vast numbers of people I confront, including Robbie the Fire Bernstein, whom I mentioned, who only care about consequences, especially the left wing, for whom poverty and worker ownership is primary. And there are a lot of those people, and maybe we can convert them. But the answer to your question is, of course, in other contexts, I would use the superior arguments that Dennis is advocating.
All right. Well, let's open this up now to the audience.
So, Gene, it seems like your argument is that you need to find the red-pilled people, the people whose eyes have been opened to the evils of government in some area, and then it's like a domino effect. Eventually, they will become libertarian. What makes you think that? I mean, look at last year. We had in this very room Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He is the most red-pilled politician I know. I mean, he sees the evil of government. He sees what happened with the medical, whatever, the pharmaceutical industrial complex. He sees what happened with his uncle's murder. I mean, he sees the evil of government. He's not a libertarian. He's never going to be a libertarian because he sees the value of, for his personal helping the poor, he still thinks the government is something that is a valuable tool. He's not a libertarian. So it seems to me that yes, red pill, maybe that's a way of qualifying people in Dennis's idea of saying, oh, these red pill people, maybe they're good, but the only way they can you convince them of actually becoming libertarian, and more of them to convince them, is by the ethical argument.
Well, first, I completely grant your description of RFK. And again, I guess, once again, you permit me to clarify my argument. I guess I should ask Dennis to make up his mind about whether we can convince a few people or more people. I never meant to imply that I can convince the majority of left-wingers about worker ownership and poverty. I never meant to imply that I can convince the majority of people who go through traumatic experiences with government and then begin to think, well, this is probably, these are a bunch of bad actors, I should be a libertarian. I've just found that it does happen, and we don't know. Again, you're imputing to me mistakenly far too much optimism about what is possible. I guess the only other thing I would say is that history is filled with surprises. Slavery was around for 20,000 years. Somehow it ended. In 1987, if I told you the Berlin Wall is going to fall and the Soviet Union is going to unravel in 4 years, you would have told me I was crazy. All we know to do is to continue to try. And again, no, I don't know. And then again, of course, you're right. Look, he's a candidate. He's running for office. He's not exactly my inspiring example of somebody who can get converted to libertarianism. I'm only saying that if Dennis is saying that he can only convert a few people, I'm only saying very possibly, I don't know for sure, I can convert a few more people than Dennis. Possibly I can. But it might only be a few. But a few is a heck of a lot better than none at all. And Dennis is saying for sure, this is the way to convert more people. We just don't know. Yeah.
All right, next question.
I'm working with the Italian libertarian movement to spread libertarianism in Italy.
Well, you took too fast, wasn't it?
Sorry. I'm working for the Italian libertarian movement to spread libertarianism in Italy, and I verified that some people are more responsive to ethical arguments and some other for consequentialist argument. So I would say, is it really possible to say that something is good, ethically good, while having bad consequences, and by the same token, having using a consequentialist argument at the same time saying that it's a bad, ethically bad. So I would see the two opinions as complementary, and like the ethical guy would still need the consequentialist person to argue from that point of view. So my question would be, have you considered the possibility that your two opinions are complementary and we need both of you guys?
You want to comment? Yeah.
Oh, yes, that was actually our resolution, is that, we grant that both are useful. We both use both. The question really is primary. Do you use primarily consequentialism, primarily ethical? But yeah, and that's really what you're seeing here. We actually had a little bit of trouble finding a resolution that we could disagree on.
No.
But you know how Benjamin Shapiro goes and destroys college kids. That's what Gene wanted to do here. So.
Well, okay. This is the ninth time I've been compared with Ben Shapiro, and I had Dennis didn't even remember his Jewish name, and he said, "Who's that short guy who talks so fast?" And I said, "You mean Ben Shapiro?" "Yeah, that guy." Well, I can't stand the guy personally. So please stop with the Ben Shapiro, Dennis. But aside from that, I believe, the reason why Dennis and I hit on something that we disagree about is precisely because I think that it's great for him to be the standard bearer and sort of believe in himself. But when it comes to you rational people who are voting on a resolution, you have to say, look, more power to you, Dennis. We won't even give you the results of the voting if you believe that you can convince more people. But why don't you just believe that you can convince some? I'm sure you have. You're very good at what you do. But the fact of the matter is that we just don't know. There are many ways of approaching it. And I thought, as that gentleman said, we can convince some. Again, I guess I want to take the advantage to emphasize that it is true, of course, that a lot of people have very different values. And so of course, it then can multiply endlessly. Some people hate the idea of worker ownership anyway, so I'm not going to convince those people. I'm only saying that what they harp on over and over again is that, there shouldn't be bosses, the company should be run democratically, and then they make it so easy to point out to rational people how nuts they are because they keep celebrating Mondragon, which started in the 1960s in a poor country of Spain. It's doing okay. You can criticize it, but then I say, well, I've been hearing about Mondragon for the last 45 years. Are you really telling me that in this much richer capitalist economy, you can't create it? So if workers really want it, and then you look at surveys, are workers really unhappy reporting to bosses? Of course, I talked about myself. I worked for News Corp. I didn't want to be an owner and operator of the news corporation run by Rupert Murdoch. I just wanted to do my column. I just wanted to do my job, and I got paid adequately. So those rational arguments can run. The point is only that the people like Brian Kaplan and others love to, and of course actually David Friedman likes to do that too. That if you have a certain set of beliefs, you should be a capitalist libertarian. If you have this set of beliefs, you should be a capitalist libertarian. Although there's no question, of course, that if you're a Nazi, then of course we can't really sell you on libertarianism in terms of your own personal values. I dare say Dennis would also fail to sell that person. If you just want to kill people, obviously there are all kinds of objectives that people have that make it impossible to convert them. Again, Dennis said we can only convert a few people. I hope we can convert a few more.
Next question.
Yeah.
So, given that there is an enormous plethora of values that people can hold simultaneously,
Into the mic.
so given that there is a seemingly endless number of different values people can weigh, and some people would have very little in the way of a value system proper, really no establishment for a previously held ethical system in some cases, would it not be easier, given libertarians' nature, to meet people where they are, say hit the right from the right and the left from the left, to then case by case choose an approach based on whether somebody has any sort of pre-established ethical system? Say, like a deeply religious person, you attack them from a more a position maybe Gene would favor more, and for someone with a rather secular background, I think your approach would perhaps be better.
Dennis, you want to?
That's me. Yeah, for some reason, Gene has made this a personal contest between Gene and me in terms of how we could possibly, who could convert more people. And I would like to take that challenge, but I do think that there's an upper limit, and we will have to be much more careful about what conversion is. I think the question, though, is how many people are like Gene Epstein? Because if we want to convert more people, as Gene Epstein does, we have to be like Gene Epstein. And Gene Epstein is a brilliant man. And he can actually tell you. I mean, I was sitting over here, and David Friedman was in the audience heckling me. He's not here, thank God. And I was talking about how minimum wage was my end point. And he said, and he started talking about all these studies that prove that minimum wage was actually shouldn't be. And then I said, yeah, but there's other studies. So he went ahead and cited 3 studies. Okay, the book, and then talked about the experimental design on all 3 of these studies. Is that what we're going to do? Is that what, I mean, Gene might be able to do that. I can't remember my wife's name sometime. I just, I think that if what we're doing is saying, how can we convert the most people, we convert the most people. I think it has to be something that's for us mere mortals, that we can actually utilize. I think your question had to do more with, should we approach them with the left and the right argument? I kind of cut right through those. I do use consequentialist arguments like you're suggesting, but then we're just entering in the battle of the crystal balls, and then it just goes on ad infinitum.
Well, okay, that's just the point. First of all, I want to emphasize that, again, when Dennis looks at me, he sees Ben Shapiro and he sees David Friedman, and I think he's not really seeing me. Again, I do these debates, and again, I'm bragging, 6.6 million views, and perhaps a good many of them didn't watch it to the end. But if I converted 2% of that 6.6 million, by addressing people who really swore by this socialist, that's a lot. But if I converted 2%, and I'm not going to be able to crunch the numbers, maybe I converted 10,000 people, I dearly hope that my 10,000 will be overmatched by Dennis's 17,000. I'm rooting for him to exceed whatever number I achieve. I'm only insisting that he's sure about the outcome, and I'm not. And that's the reason why you can't vote for his resolution. There's no contest. I'm rooting for him. I think that I would really love to see that happen, that people get converted based on principles rather than on getting zapped on a particular issue. By the way, I do want to concede one point. I keep mentioning poverty and worker ownership because those are one of the easiest ones. You don't get into studies and all that stuff. But Dennis is rightfully, to some degree, rightfully diminishing. I think you can get some, you have to tell stories to people. And the minimum wage is indeed a difficult one. It's not actually been my most successful crusade. It's really poverty. It's poverty and worker ownership that have been my most, because again, there's just whole lot of people who think, well, my God, it's just the capitalist bosses. The capitalism is all about the bosses. You can easily convince people otherwise of that, and then you can easily show people about what happens to the poor people of the world under government domination versus capitalism. But I basically would agree with Dennis, since he keeps harping on the minimum wage issue, that the minimum wage is a little bit of a sticky wicket. If you're going to use that one to talk to people, it's a little harder to convince people. Yeah.
Next question.
Thank you. So I'm curious as to why we don't use the argument that if we adopt the non-aggression principle and the self-ownership principle, which everybody, at least in my experience, even the people who go along with government mandates, agree with, yes, I should own my own body and I don't believe I should hurt anyone. Why don't we go immediately into what do you think the consequences of libertarianism would be? Because that, to my mind, that lets them think it through.
Well,
and neither of you said that.
Well, I can only tell you that the answer I get from all of those Marxists and quasi-Marxists, I mean, look, again, it's just literally true that the supposedly sophisticated people, I mean, wait, let me confess that one of the stains on my record is that in my first debate with a young socialist, I lost my temper with him, and I really shouldn't have done that, because again, these are supposedly educated people, but I can only tell you that you walk around the Upper West Side of Manhattan, people who graduated from name brand colleges, and you know what they'll tell you in answer to your question? The poor people of the world will starve under your system, and you don't have any freedom when you go to work because you have to take orders from a boss. And that's what you get under capitalism. So don't give me your airy-fairy bullshit about the non-aggression principle, because all you're really endorsing is exploitation and dominance by the worker. And you should listen to Richard Wolff. I'll tell you, Richard Wolff was on the Glenn Lowry. You know Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter? I don't know if you know those two guys, but I had to sit there listening to Richard Wolff, whom I had debated, get on that show and tell them all. And Glenn Lowry, an economist at Brown, and John McWhorter, who's been pretty insightful, they both thought that Richard Wolff was quite insightful. I got in touch with Glenn Lowry, who was a nice guy, and I asked him, could you have me on your show? I want to pinpoint specific things that Richard Wolff said and then refute them. So he said yes. So I sent him a whole list of things to quote and then refuted them, because I was just amazed that he could. This is what he was saying. That's capitalism for you. You go to work and you produce $100 worth of value and you get $80 in return. That's $20 worth of exploitation. That's what he said. And John McWhorter said, sounds very interesting. But you know what, Glenn? I'll tell you another instance. Glenn Lowry, I think he was a little embarrassed by what happened because he didn't publish my interview. He only made it available to subscribers. And then, although I took the link and I published it anyway, but of course it didn't go out to his audience. But then he scheduled another debate with Richard Wolff, because I think he felt a little bit embarrassed. Forgive my long-winded story, I'll shut up. The point is, all I'm saying is that that's what you will hear from a lot of these people. Now, maybe not from all of them, and that's where, of course, that's where my opponent shines. But forgive me, but please visit the Upper West Side. I'll take you around. We'll have a microphone, and we'll ask that question of those super educated ignoramuses about what will happen. Now, indeed, I've been, of course, trying to control my temper. If you watch my debate with Richard Wolff, you'll find that I kept my cool. And maybe that was part of it. But to my embarrassment, the one I had with Basco Sankara, where I yelled at him, this is the funny part, about 1/3 of my audience said, that was great. I said, but I lost my temper with the guy. Oh, you should have yelled at him. 2/3 of the people said that was really kind of dumb and imprudent to yell at the kid. So I shouldn't have done that. Because you do lose your patience with these people. But with Richard Wolff, I kept my cool, and I'm happy that that's the one that got so much attention. That's the answer you'll get. So I'm sorry for my digression. Go on, yeah. That's my answer.
All right, we only have 2 minutes left, so let's get one question from the guy in the nap-themed shirt.
If it's fast.
Yeah, if it's fast.
All right, I'll try to make it fast. All right, so Gene, you've been focusing on the word more in the resolution, and I think that's a fair point, but there's also 2 other words there that might go against that, one being libertarian and the other being persuade.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, can you be a libertarian if you don't believe in the ethical value of the non-aggression principle? And secondly, even though you might be right that you could potentially introduce more people to the concept of libertarianism through consequentialist arguments, the question isn't introduce, it's persuade. And I don't think you're really persuaded to identify as a libertarian until you've really looked into the non-aggression principle and believe in that as an ethical value.
I have 2 answers to that. First of all, you have a potentially a fair point. I guess I would say that first, to the extent that you have a fair sort of challenge to my point, that I would say that we libertarians have got to sort of settle for what we can get. And when if I could, I would say that if I can win somebody over to arguing that the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution as, of course, amended, however imperfect those documents are. And by the way, Murray Rothbard wrote a book called For a New Liberty when libertarianism was getting hot. In one, he had one version of it, and then there's a second version of the same book that came out that starts with the U.S. Constitution Declaration of Independence. So my only point is that if we can get people to be sort of like small L libertarians, then I would say that we've achieved a lot. So you would counter and say, well, that's not enough. They like the Constitution. They want a much smaller government. They want to abolish most of the agencies of government. They're against the war state. They understand what welfare does. All of that, well, that's not libertarian enough. If you want to vote for the resolution because you don't think that's libertarian enough, then that's okay. I would say that's achieving a hell of a lot. If we can do that, they probably won't vote for Democrats or Republicans. But I would also say that what happens as well, which has happened to me, is that once they begin to see the consequences of what government does, that's when they start reading Dennis Pratt.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time for Q&A, but we do have 5 minutes each. So if any of this prompted your thinking, Dennis, now is your chance to respond.
Authoritarians face the same problems we do. Consequentialism is just not good enough. That's why they put us into government schools. That's why we pledge allegiance to the flag every day. That's why they control our biological functions in schools. That's why they tell us what we can study and what we can't study. Because the underlying ethic that they are teaching in government schools is to obey your master. Fred, that guy next door, you know the one you barbecue with? He's the one who's going to be implementing the authoritarianism on you. He's going to be reporting you like he did with Anne Frank. He's going to be shoving you into boxcars. Not for some sort of consequential reason, but because it's good and right to obey your master. That he has a superior ownership over us. Libertarians are arguing we have the superior ownership. That's the battle. Rulership didn't rely on consequentialism throughout most of the history. The pharaohs didn't explain why it was consequentially important to build the pyramids. You did it because the pharaoh was a god and it was good to obey your god. They didn't explain why you had to march into wars for the king, because the king was appointed by God. And it was good to obey your god. Now we have the god of democracy that has failed. And we are to obey it. This is a broken ethical system that we are fighting. That is our job. Abolitionism, which I think we are the last step of abolitionists. Abolitionism wasn't ended on consequentialist grounds. All the consequentialist arguments went the other way. Well, who's going to pick the cotton? Will we have enough clothes? We'll freeze during the winter. Oh, the businesses, we'll lose the businesses. What are we going to do about the unemployment? Blacks won't know where to go. The consequentialist arguments were all there. You know how we beat abolitionism? It is evil as sin to enslave another human being. That's our same argument. The counter arguments don't matter. Did they imagine Case International Harvesters? Did they imagine these gigantic factories to make clothing? They couldn't possibly do it because their crystal ball doesn't tell them. So I urge you to take Gene Epstein's infinite courses on infinite consequential arguments. They are very, very impressive. And you can learn some of the answers to the innumerable questions that you're going to get. And hopefully you'll remember them. But for those of you who realize that consequentialism is just too unwieldy, too many policy areas to become an expert, it's too hard to learn, it's too hard for converts to absorb, it's too long to explain, it's too easy to refute, it's not sufficient to convert them to libertarianism, it's too hard to qualify people to figure out whom you should be spending your time, limited time on. And it's just not unique to libertarianism. For those of you who would say to any consequentialist argument that we should kill Gene Epstein and share his organs around, you say, I don't give a damn about your studies. I don't give a damn about your math. I don't give a damn about your second and third order. I don't give a damn about your crystal ball. It's just evil. And we will not do it. Then, for those of you who know that ethics is the core of libertarianism, and thus it must be primary, not consequentialism, ethics must be primary in our introduction to libertarianism. Otherwise, we're not really spreading libertarianism. We're spreading something else. I think you should sign up for Gene's courses. Please do. But use the special discount code. If you order today, $19.95, Gene lost the debate. All one word.
All right, thanks, Dennis.
Well, as you know, I think most of you should know, I love and admire Dennis, even though he's being very unfair to me. I wrote an article about schooling, and I wrote about how when I was a college instructor, I decided to tell everybody when they enrolled that just by virtue of signing up for the course, you're going to get a passing grade, because I was sick of imposing on people my courses. I dropped out of college teaching about 48 years ago, and I've never returned. And so if you, so to speak, sign up for my courses, it just means going into thesoforum.org and watching the 11 debates that I've done, and 11 debates, with 10 debates are already recorded, especially with the one with Richard Wolff, perhaps, and the one yesterday with David will be online, and then the one I'm about to lose today will also be recorded. The point is that Dennis, again, is using a cheap argument by trying to claim that what I'm advocating is this extensive coursework. I've tried to simplify concepts. I've tried to go to the jugular to try to see where are the vulnerabilities, where are the issues of the people around me in constructing the SoHo Forum, which I've had over 90 debates. I've been not infrequently disappointed in the results. I would say I often have a very huge investment in what happens. I think it's fairly simple, for example, to use arguments like Thomas Sowell about racism or sexism. That again, if black people are paid 80% of what whites are paid for the same work, then all the bigoted employers would go out of business, because then you could hire like 12 black people for the cost of 8 whites. And Thomas Sowell pointed out that in Union of South Africa under apartheid and in the South under Jim Crow, the capitalists kept breaking the law and hiring blacks anyway, because capitalism punishes bigotry. Government doesn't care. Woodrow Wilson fired all the blacks from government because he didn't care. So I go into arguments of that kind. So that's what I do. I don't teach those imaginary courses that Dennis doesn't want to sign up for. I try to be like him. Excuse me, that nobody could sign up for. Again, I think Dennis is making the mistake of thinking that you've got to convince somebody of all 19 issues to make them libertarians. But again, I will revert to the excellent question that was asked by the gentleman whom I don't see here at the moment, but it was maybe the guy who was, I forget, wearing that thing. Where you asked, well, again, if you're just somebody who believes in the U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, are you a libertarian? And if you don't read Dennis Pratt, I would say, well, gee, that's a huge achievement. So indeed, or if you want to go to the extreme and say, am I advocating that we want to make everybody into ANCAPs, anarcho-capitalists? By the way, I admit that I avoid issues of anarchism when I talk to people, because once you start with the anarchism, then it'll never stop. So let's just talk about the state that the founding fathers envisioned, because that's usually where people get hit in the gut. And again, the point then is that we can convince people that those people who Dennis talks about, who have no right to rule over us, that their stupidity, their irrationality, their complete lack of qualifications to rule over us is palpable everywhere we look. They are building windmills. They are saying moronic things. They don't understand what cures poverty. We can easily expose them for who they are. And again, I should have gotten a chance to ask Dennis a question. Do you think we can convert a lot of people to what you advocate, or just a few people? He's made both statements. I don't know if we can convert a lot of people, by the way, but I don't think that Dennis knows either. I'm only saying, once again, that you should vote against the resolution because we want to have hope for all ways, and while I again insist Dennis's way is the superior way, it's not necessarily the way to convert more people, at least of libertarianism with a small L. Thank you.
All right, a big thanks to both debaters. Woo! Yeah, great job. And now the moment of truth. Post-debate vote. If you go to SoHoVote.com, you may now enter your vote, and please do so quickly because we got to turn over the pavilion. But how many of you have heard the one about the economist whose friend found him on his hands and knees by the side of the road under a street lamp? And the friend asked him, well, what are you doing down there? And the economist looks up and he said, well, I lost my keys back there. And and the friend says, well, if you lost them back there, why are you looking right here? And the economist says, because this is where the light is. It's a joke about economists only studying, stuff where there's data, but, okay. Yeah, go ahead, Dennis. Dennis wants to pitch something.
So my wife, wave your hand, Carol. She's right over here. She has some brochures for out-of-staters especially, half price off at our inn. Hopefully you guys have already voted. And on the other side, the Freetown Project, which I'm willing to zoom in and help bring a small microcosm of concentration strategy to your state. So if anybody would like those, please grab them.
All right. Let's make sure the voting concludes. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, okay. So this is where the results are going to come from?
Yeah. You'll read them.
Okay. All right. I see some results on my phone. These are the official ones. Okay. Here we go. So before the debate, yes, in favor of the proposition that the better way to persuade more people of libertarianism is to convince them of the ethics stemming from self-ownership of the non-aggression principle without relying primarily on consequentialist utilitarian arguments, was 56.25%. No was 15.63%, and undecided was 28.13%. After the debate, yes fell from 56.25 to 43.75%, a loss of 12.5%. No increased from 15.63 to 37.5%, a 21.88% change. Undecided fell, and therefore, Gene, you are the winner of the famous Tootsie Roll.
Janice's way is still the superior way.
Thank you, everyone.